welcome back to my channel. Today we are talking about Christmas ghost stories. It's day one of Vlogmas slash have yourself a haunted little Christmas. So this first story is a Victorian story from the 1900s, early 1900s. And before we dive into that, you might notice I don't look like a soulless zombie today. I actually had time to do my makeup. Again, I'm not good at my makeup, but I really enjoy doing it, so I'm glad that I had time to do it for this video. I have been working kind of crazy hours, but also missing a lot of work because we've had a lot of illness in our family, and so that hasn't been a lot of fun. And we got our Christmas tree up, which was just our fake one because I didn't want to do, it's like 18 degrees and there's snow, and I already explained that. But we're doing a fake tree this year, and I bought some ornaments when we were at Target for Black Friday sale. Was it Black Friday or Cyber Monday? I can't remember. One of those things. I got ornaments on sale. And so that was that. But thank goodness I did, because our storage unit ended up getting redlocked inadvertently. So all of my Christmas stuff is still in storage, which is why don't mind this background. Don't look behind me, because we're still moving into our house with all the craziness going on in our family and how we moved in really last minute. I'm actually sitting on my mattress on the floor because the movers broke our bed frame, the really nice one from IKEA that we had. So I'm trying to figure out solutions to that. Ultimately, I think I'm just gonna have to buy a new damn bed, which really pisses me off. But that's why I'm saying don't mind the background. I know it's a mess. It's all a hot mess, but at least my face is not a hot mess today. That was cheesy. So what's interesting about the 19th century is that it was actually a little bit of a tradition to tell ghost stories at Christmas time, especially for the Victorians in England. And it never really took off as much in America as it did in the UK, but what's really interesting about it is that it almost became a tradition to sit around the fire and tell ghost stories. Now, the other thing that's interesting about this is that a lot of it had to do with how publishing was happening back then. So it had to do with not only the fact that the Victorians were kind of into that spiritualist sort of mindset, and they were already kind of in that almost gothic like mode. And I don't mean gothic like old gothic, but they did have that style too, but more like our modern day goths, right? Like they were really into the macabre and death, and they mourned really publicly and had special jewelry and clothing for mourning, and they became obsessed with death almost. And I think that that's part of why I'm really interested in the Victorian era, as well as my grandma, who was really special to me, was pretty much raised by her grandparents who were Victorians. They were kind of at the height of the Victorian era, and they just interest me a lot. And so I think mixed with my family history and just in general, like being into more of like that death and dark stuff, I think that's why the Victorians interest me as much. But I think it's so cool that they were so into ghost stories. But anyway, it had a lot to do with publishing, because ghost stories, as we all know, can be cheap and short but still have a huge impact. And so the story Smee is one of those that is cheap, short, but still has like that really spooky impact. And so I have hair on my lip. Okay. Obviously, one of the most popular Victorian ghost stories that is also Christmas themed is Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. We will be talking about that later, but I feel like it is so widely covered and very known that I'm going to push it a little bit into the middle or later of the series, just because I feel like you guys probably already know what A Christmas Carol is, and I still want to talk about it because it did revolutionize the ghost stories around Christmas, so I'm still super interested in it, but we're not going to talk about it today. So one thing that's interesting is that Christmas has been associated with ghosts for a very long time. And we may not necessarily think that because it has been turned into a Christian holiday, but it did also used to be a pagan holiday. And so mixed in with that Yule sort of thing, there's a lot of similarities between, let's just say, like Dia de los Muertos and also Halloween, where people were honoring the dead and they were communicating with their dead ancestors. Another thing that's really interesting is that ghost stories also started to come from the fact that Victorians started to design their houses in a way that was almost kind of creepy in itself for their servants. They didn't want their servants to be seen, so there were hidden passageways, there were the elevators just for basically transporting food and trays and sometimes even servants up between levels. They had their own quarters, they were expected to stay hidden, and there were hidden passageways sometimes into staircases that nobody except the servants saw. And so when you think about it, that's creepy in itself, and if you're staying in a strange house and you don't know that there's servants walking around, you might hear things in the walls, or you might see somebody disappear through a doorway. So some of that, again, the skepticism part of me is like, you know, a lot of the stuff that the Victorians came up with could have been attributed to that, and it is something that was a little bit freaky and started to fuel some of that imagination too for ghost stories. Now, the story that we're talking about today is Smee, and it's by A.M. Barrage, and I could be saying the last name wrong, but it's one of my probably favorite ghost stories that I've come across from the Victorian era. So basically Smee is taken from a game that essentially was like a form of hide and seek, and the game hide and seek can be very creepy on its own anyway, so I think it's an amazing setting for having a ghost story with kids playing hide and seek in a house where somebody died. So I'm actually going to read you the story and we will recap after. "No," said Jackson with a smile. "I'm sorry, I don't want to upset your game. I shan't be doing that because you'll have plenty without me. But I'm not playing any games of hide and seek." It was Christmas Eve, and we were a party of 14 with just the proper leavening of youth. We had dined well, it was the season for childish games, and we were all in the mood for playing them. All, that is, except Jackson. When somebody suggested hide and seek, there was an almost unanimous approval. It was not like Jackson to spoil sport or refuse to do as others wanted. Somebody asked him if he were feeling seedy. "No," he answered. "I feel perfectly fit, thanks. But," he added with a smile, which softened without retracting the flat refusal, "I'm not playing hide and seek." "Why not?" someone asked. He hesitated for a moment before replying. "I sometimes go and stay at a house where a girl was killed. She was playing hide and seek in the dark. She didn't know the house very well. There was a door that led to the servants' staircase. When she chased, she thought the door led to a bedroom. She opened the door and jumped, and landed at the bottom of the stairs. She broke her neck, of course." We all looked serious. Mrs. Fernley said, "How terrible! And were you there when it happened?" Jackson shook his head sadly. "No," he said, "but I was there when something else happened, something worse." "What could be worse than that?" "This was," said Jackson. He hesitated for a moment, then he said, "I wonder if any of you have ever played a game called Smee. It's much better than hide and seek. The name comes from It's Me, of course. Perhaps you'd like to play it instead of hide and seek. Let me tell you the rules of the game. Every player is given a sheet of paper. All the sheets except one are blank. On the last sheet of paper is written Smee. Nobody knows who Smee is except Smee himself or herself. You turn out the lights, and Smee goes quietly out of the room and hides. After a time, the others go off to search for Smee. But of course, they don't know who they're looking for. When one player meets another, he challenges him by saying, Smee. The other player answers Smee, and they continue searching. But the real Smee doesn't answer when someone challenges. The second player stays quietly beside him. Presently, they will be discovered by a third player. He will challenge and receive no answer, and he will join the first two. This goes on until all the players are in the same place. The last one to find Smee has to play a forfeit. It's a good, noisy, amusing game. In a big house, it often takes a long time for everyone to find Smee. Perhaps you'd like to try. I'll happily play my forfeit and sit here by the fire while you play. It sounds a good game, I remarked. Have you played it too, Jackson? Yes, he answered. I played it in the house that I was telling you about. And she was there, the girl who broke... No, said someone else. He told us he wasn't there when she broke her neck. Jackson thought for a moment. I don't know if she was there or not. I'm afraid she was. I know that there were 13 of us playing the game, and there were only 12 in the house, and I didn't know the dead girl's name. When I heard that whispered name in the dark, it didn't worry me, but I tell you, I'm never going to play that kind of game again. It made me quite nervous for a long time. I prefer to pay my forfeit at once." We all stared at him. His words did not make sense at all. Tim, who was the kindest man in the world, he smiled at us all. "This sounds like an interesting story," he said. "Come on, Jackson, you can tell it to us instead of playing a forfeit." "Very well," said Jackson, and here is his story. Have you met the Sangstons? They are cousins of mine, and they live in Surrey. 5 years ago, they invited me to go and spend Christmas with them. It was an old house with lots of unnecessary passages and staircases. A stranger could get lost in it quite easily. Well, I went down for that Christmas. Violet Sangston promised me that I knew most of the other guests. Unfortunately, I couldn't get away from my job until Christmas Eve. All the other guests had arrived there the previous day. I was the last to arrive, and I was only just in time for dinner. I said hello to everyone I knew, and Violet Sangston introduced me to the people I didn't know. Then it was time to go to dinner. That is perhaps why I didn't hear the name of a tall, dark-haired, handsome girl whom I hadn't met before. Everyone was in a rather hurry, and I am always bad at catching people's names. She looked cold and clever. She didn't look at all friendly, but she looked interesting, and I wondered who she was. I didn't ask because I was sure that someone would speak to her by name during the meal. Unluckily, however, I was a long way from her at the table. I was sitting next to Mrs. Gorman, and as usual, Mrs. Gorman was being very bright and amusing. Her conversation is always worth listening to, and I completely forgot to ask the name of the dark, proud girl. There were 12 of us, including the Sangstons themselves. We were all young, or trying to be young. Jack and Violet Sangston were the oldest, and their 17-year-old Reggie was the youngest. It was Reggie who suggested Smee when the talk turned to games. He told us the rules of the game, just as I've described them to you. Jack Sangston warned us all, if you are going to play games in the dark, please be careful of the back stairs on the first floor. A door leads to them, and I've often thought about taking the door off. In the dark, a stranger in the house could think they were walking into the room. A girl really did break her neck on those stairs. I asked how it happened. It was about 10 years ago, before we came here. There was a party, and they were playing hide and seek. This girl was looking for somewhere to hide. She heard somebody coming and ran along the passage to get away. She opened the door, thinking it led to a bedroom. She planned to hide in there until the seeker had gone. Unfortunately, it was the door that led to the back stairs. She fell straight down to the bottom of the stairs. She was dead when they picked her up. We all promised to be careful. Mrs. Gorman even made a little joke about living to be 90. You see, none of us had known the poor girl, and we did not want to feel sad on Christmas Eve. Well, we all started the game immediately after dinner. Young Reggie Sangston went round making sure all the lights were off, except the ones in the servants' rooms and in the sitting room where we were. We then prepared 12 sheets of paper. 11 of them were blank, and one of them had Smee written on it. Reggie mixed them all up when we took each one. The person who got the paper with Smee on it had to hide. I looked at mine and saw it was blank. A moment later, all the electric lights went out. In the darkness, I heard someone moving very quietly to the door. After a minute, somebody blew a whistle, and we all rushed to the door. I had no idea who was Smee. For 5 or 10 minutes, we were all rushing up and down passages, and in and out of rooms, challenging each other and answering, "Smee? Smee." After a while, the noise died down, and I guessed that someone had found Smee. After a time, I found a group of people all sitting on some narrow stairs. I challenged and received no answer, so Smee was there. I hurriedly joined the group. Presently, 2 more players arrived, each one hurrying to avoid being last. Jack Sangston was last and was given a forfeit. "I think we're all here now, aren't we?" he remarked. He lit a match, looked up the staircase, and began to count. 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, he said, and then laughed. "That's silly, there's one too many." The match went out, and he lit another and began to count. He got as far as 12, then he looked puzzled. "There are 13 people, he said. "I haven't counted myself yet." "Oh, nonsense," I laughed. "You probably began with yourself, and now you want to count yourself twice." His son took out his electric torch. It gave a better light than the matches, and we all began to count. Of course, there were 12 of us. Jack laughed. "Well," he said, "I was sure I counted 13 twice." From halfway up the stairs, Violet Sangston spoke nervously. "I thought there was somebody sitting 2 steps above me. Have you moved, Captain Ransom?" The captain said that he hadn't, but I thought there was somebody sitting between Mrs. Sangston and me. Just for a moment, there was an uncomfortable something in the air. A cold finger seemed to touch us all. For that moment, we all felt that something odd and unpleasant had just happened and was likely to happen again. Then we laughed at ourselves and at each other, and we felt normal again. There were only 12 of us, and that was that. Still laughing, we marched back to the sitting room to begin again. This time, I was Smee. Violet Sangston found me while I was searching for a hiding place. That game didn't last long. Soon there were 12 people, and the game was over. Violet felt cold and wanted her jacket. Her husband went up to their bedroom to fetch it. As soon as he'd gone, Reggie touched me on the arm. He was looking pale and sick. "Quick," he whispered. "I've got to talk to you. Something horrible has happened." We went into the breakfast room. "What's the matter?" I asked. "I don't know. You were Smee last time, weren't you?" Well, of course I didn't know who Smee was. While Mother and the others ran to the west side of the house and found you, I went east. There's a deep clothes cupboard in my bedroom. It looked like a good hiding place. I thought that perhaps Smee might be there. I opened the door in the dark and touched somebody's hand. "Smee?" I whispered. There was no answer, so I thought I had found Smee. Well, I don't understand it, but I suddenly had a strange, cold feeling. I can't describe it, but I felt that something was wrong. So I turned on my electric torch, and there was nobody there. Now, I am sure I touched a hand, and nobody could get out of the cupboard because I was standing in the doorway. What do you think? "You imagined you touched a hand," I said. He gave a short laugh. "I knew you would say that," he said. "Of course I imagined it. That's the only explanation, isn't it?" I agreed with him. I could see that he still felt shaken. Together we returned to the sitting room for another game of Smee. The others were already waiting to start again. Perhaps it was my imagination, although I'm almost sure it was not, but I had a feeling that nobody was really enjoying the game anymore. Everyone was too polite to mention it. All the same, I had the feeling that something was wrong. All the fun had gone out of the game. Something deep inside me was trying to warn me. "Take care," it whispered. "Take care. Take care." There was some unnatural, unhealthy influence at work in the house. Why did I have this feeling? Because Jack Sangston had counted 13 people instead of 12? Because his son imagined he had touched someone's hand in an empty cupboard? I tried to laugh at myself, but I didn't succeed. Well, we started again. While we were all chasing the unknown Smee, we were all as noisy as ever, but it seemed to me that most of us were just acting. We were no longer enjoying the game. At first I stayed with the others, but for several minutes no Smee was found. I left the main group and started searching on the first floor at the west side of the house. And there, while I was feeling my way along, I bumped into a pair of human knees. I put my hand out and touched a soft, heavy curtain. Then I knew where I was. There were tall, deep windows and window seats at the end of the passage. The curtains reached to the ground. Somebody was sitting in a corner of the window seats behind a curtain. Aha, I thought, I've caught Smee. So I pulled the curtain to one side and touched a woman's arm. It was a dark, moonless night outside. I couldn't see the woman sitting in the corner of the window seat. "Smee?" I whispered. There was no answer. When Smee is challenged, he, or she, does not answer, so I sat down beside her to wait for the others. Then I whispered, "What's your name?" And out of the darkness beside me the whisper came, "Brenda Ford." I did not know the name, but I guessed at once who she was. I knew every girl in the house by name except one, and that was the tall, pale, dark girl. So here she was sitting beside me on the window seat, shut in between a heavy curtain and a window. I whispered one or two rather ordinary questions to her and received no answer. Smee is a game of silence. It's a rule of the game that Smee and the person or persons who have found Smee have to keep quiet. This, of course, makes it harder for the others to find them. But there was nobody else about. I wondered, therefore, why she was insisting on silence. I spoke again and got no answer. I began to feel a little annoyed. Perhaps she's one of those cold, clever girls who have a poor opinion of all men, I thought. She doesn't like me, and she's using the rules of the game as an excuse for not speaking. Well, if she doesn't like sitting here with me, I certainly don't want to sit with her. I turned away from her. I hope someone finds us soon, I thought. As I sat there, I realized that I disliked sitting beside this girl very much indeed. That was strange. The girl I had seen at dinner had seemed likable in a cold kind of way. I noticed her and wanted to know more about her, but now I felt really uncomfortable beside her. The feeling of something wrong, something unnatural, was growing. I remembered touching her arm, and I trembled with horror. I wanted to jump up and run away. I prayed that someone else would come along soon. Just then, I heard light footsteps in the passage. Somebody on the other side of the curtain brushed against my knees. The curtain moved to one side, and a woman's hand touched my shoulder. "Smee," whispered a voice that I recognized at once. It was Mrs. Gorman. Of course, she received no answer. She came and sat down beside me, and at once I felt much better. "It's Toni Jackson, isn't it?" she whispered. "Yes," I whispered back. "You're not Smee, are you?" "No, she's on my other side." She reached out across me. I heard her fingernails scratch a woman's silk dress. "Hello, Smee, how are you? Who are you? Oh, is it against the rules to talk? Never mind, Toni, we'll break the rules. Do you know, Toni, this game is beginning to annoy me a little. I hope they aren't going to play it all evening. I'd like to play a nice, quiet game all together beside a warm fire." "Me too," I agreed. "Can't you suggest something to them? There's something rather unhealthy about this particular game. I'm sure I'm being very silly, but I can't get rid of the idea that we've got an extra player, somebody who ought to not be here at all." That was exactly how I felt, but I didn't say so. However, I felt very much better. Mrs. Gorman's arrival had chased away my fears. We sat talking. "I wonder when the others will find us," said Mrs. Gorman. After a time, we heard the sound of feet and young Reggie's voice shouting, "Hello, hello, is anyone there?" "Yes," I answered. "Is Mrs. Gorman with you?" "Yes." "What happened to you? You've both got forfeits. We've all been waiting for you for hours." "But you haven't found Smee yet," I complained. "You haven't, you mean? I was Smee this time." "But Smee is here with us," I cried. "Yes," agreed Mrs. Gorman. The curtain was pulled back, and we sat looking into the eye of Reggie's electric torch. I looked at Mrs. Gorman, and then on my other side. Between me and the wall was an empty place on the window seat. I stood up at once, then I sat down again. I was feeling very sick, and the world seemed to be going round and round. "There was somebody there," I insisted. "I touched her." "So did I," said Mrs. Gorman in a trembling voice, "and I don't think anyone could leave this window seat without us knowing." Reggie gave a shaky little laugh. I remembered his unpleasant experience earlier that evening. "Someone's been playing jokes," he said. "Are you coming down?" We were not very popular when we came down to the sitting room. "I found the two of them sitting behind a dark curtain on a window seat," said Reggie. I went up to the tall, dark girl. "So you pretended to be Smee and then went away," I accused her. She shook her head. Afterwards, we all played cards in the sitting room, and I was very glad. Sometime later, Jack Sangston wanted to talk to me. I could see that he was rather cross with me, and he soon told me the reason. "Toni," he said, "I suppose you are in love with Mrs. Gorman. That's your business, but please don't make love to her in my house during a game. You kept everyone waiting. It was very rude of you, and I'm ashamed of you." "But we were not alone," I protested. "There was somebody else there, somebody who was pretending to be Smee. I believe it was that tall, dark girl, Miss Ford. She whispered her name to me. Of course, she refused to admit it afterwards." Jack Sangston stared at me. "Miss who?" he breathed. "Brenda Ford," she said. Jack put a hand on my shoulder. "Look here, Toni. I don't mind a joke, but enough is enough. We don't want to worry the ladies. Brenda Ford is the name of the girl who broke her neck on the stairs. She was playing hide and seek here 10 years ago." Alright, so that's it. I think it's a really awesome Christmas story. I think that it really has that same feel that A Christmas Carol does, where it's very Christmas themed still, but you get that really creepy ghost feeling. And it's actually a pretty creepy story. Like, I get kind of creeped out every time I've read it, and I think it's amazing though. I think it's something that I definitely want to read every Christmas. I think it'll become somewhat of a new tradition for me. If you guys want to read it without listening to me read it, you'll be able to find down in the link in the description to the story, a free PDF version. So feel free to check it out, print it out, whatever you want to do with it, and enjoy. Next time, I'll have a different story, and I can't remember what, and it's on my phone, so I can't just stop recording to look. But Vlogmas 2 with our second story will be up either in 2 days or 3 days. I'm trying to crank out 8 videos in a short amount of time, and it equates to being like 3 videos a week until Christmas, which is hard when you work full-time. So give me a little bit of grace, but I still plan fully on doing it and getting through all of the stories. So I am super excited about this series, and let me know what you guys think of the story Smee. Be sure to like and subscribe if you want more, and I will see you next time. Something that I haven't said in a while is stay safe, and don't forget, don't turn out the light.